Oh, this one's on. Okay.
All right, we can share a mic up here. I think that's fine.
This one's on too.
Sorry, I'm actually so quiet and so soft-spoken. I am so petite and dainty. Leeza, do you want, as room host, do you have room host things? Yes. Let me know whatever I miss. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nourishing Seed Ancestors, Seed Workers, and the Social Justice Movements. Thank you for sticking around on this lovely afternoon. We envision this as a kind of an open discussion about a lot of the ethical and political considerations of the work that we all do with seeds. To give an overview, we're going to do kind of like the first part is going to be a panel between us four, and we'll introduce ourselves and kind of think through kind of an arc around where we come from with our ethical and political considerations with seed work, and maybe where we want to go, or maybe what our frustrations are, right, for the future, or possibilities are for the future. And then we'll open it up to an audience discussion. So some technical considerations. This is being recorded, and also it's on Zoom. People on Zoom will only hear any of us with a microphone, which is a note for us panelists, but also for folks in the audience. So Leeza and I, during the second part, will be running around with mics for folks who have things to say, questions to ask, songs to sing. And also, thank you to Alice in the back, who is going to be delivering our Zoom comments into the mic as well. Was that it? Yes, there's also live translation over Zoom. So keep that in mind with your vocal cadence and enunciation, which is really a note to me if you have ever met me and seen me speak in person. All right, let's get started. So I want to start us off by inviting each of you to introduce yourselves and share a story that grounds you in the in your ethical considerations and your sort of political framework with your relations with seed.
Should I start?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Amirah. I am the owner-operator of Sistah Seeds, a small farm and seed company where I grow heirloom vegetable seeds from the African diaspora. I want to share two seed stories with you all. And the first seed story is the story of the very first seed that I ever saved on my own. Sorry, I have to collect myself for this. So I have been farming since 2007, and I had been farming for about a decade before anyone asked me if I knew how to save a seed or bothered to teach me how to save a seed. I decided to get into seed saving work because of a meaningful conversation with an elder who told me that one of the ways that I could orient my farm work to be in support of my community, of other Black growers, was to enter into this seed world where there wasn't a lot of representation from growers and companies run by people that looked like me. So I decided to get started learning about how to save a seed for the first time. And getting started, I wanted to save seeds that were important to me and to my community, something that was special. But I really didn't know where to begin. I am African American. I'm descended from people who were ripped off of their land and whose seeds were stolen from them. And I didn't have a good idea of what varieties, what crops were most important to my community. So I started doing a lot of research and reading, and I read a blog by Michael Twitty, who's a very wonderful author that you should all read. And in his blog, he described a squash called the green striped Kershaw squash. And what really struck me about this particular seed history that he recounted is that he said that this squash, though originally from the Caribbean, became important to African Americans in the Carolinas, in particular North Carolina. And I have family that is from North Carolina that I have done some ancestry work to and traced back to North Carolina for multiple generations. And so I was interested in growing this squash that was grown by other Black people in this region. So I found some seeds online and I started to grow it. It was my very first attempt at saving a seed on my own. I had a little community garden plot. And I grew out this squash, and it grew so beautifully and so wonderfully for us in the community garden. And I loved the squash. We did an entire squash soup celebration at the garden during harvest time, and I also took some squash back and saved seeds from it and let some of it to cure in my home. Then later that fall, my grandmother passed away, my Grandma Patty. My Grandma Patty was really special to us in our family because she was the keeper of the recipes. She always made the best food, and we would always go to her house come Thanksgiving because she always threw down. She made the best greens. She made the best mac and cheese, everything. And I have really fond memories of cooking with her. She was also an amazing seamstress and tried to teach me how to sew. But everyone in our family has a food story of Grandma Patty. And when we lost her, we all went to her funeral. And it was the first time in many years that I was seeing many of my family members on her side, including her sisters, my great Aunt Maddie, who became really important to me because she reminded me so much of my grandma. But at the funeral, we were sharing all these stories of my grandma and laughing and remembering some of the delicious food. We were talking so much about food. And it came up for the very first time that my grandma had learned her recipes from her mother. And her mother would cook the food that her husband, my great-grandfather, would grow in his garden. I said, hold up, what do you mean his garden? He's like, oh, you didn't know? We grew up with a garden in the backyard. We grew most of our own food. No one had ever told me that my great-grandfather had this garden where he grew most of the food that they ate in their households, or that my great-grandmother made biscuits that brought the entire neighborhood to her doorstep. So I asked more about my great-grandfather's garden, and my great-aunt Maddie mentioned this one squash that he was fond of. And she was describing it to me. She said it was kind of shaped like a butternut, but it was bigger, and it was cream with some green stripes on it. And I said, hey, does it look like this? And I showed her my phone of the squash that I grew that year. And she said, that's exactly what it looks like. Fast forward a few weeks later, it was Thanksgiving. And it also happened to be, it would have been my grandmother's 75th birthday. So once again, I went down to my great Aunt Maddie's house, and I brought with me a pie from the squash that I had grown that year. And I just put it on the table with all the other desserts and just left it at that. We ate our way through the Thanksgiving spread. And at one point, my great Aunt Maddie is putting different desserts on her plate, and she takes a slice of my pie, and she takes a bite, and she says, wait a minute. who made this pie? And so I came over and said, that's the one that I made. She said, what is this? I said, oh, I made that with the squash that you told me about, the Kushaw squash that you said that your father used to grow. And she said, it tastes exactly like I remember from childhood. And then she made everybody in the family take a bite of the pie. And she said, come and taste this pie. It tastes just like I remember it. I haven't had this since I was a little girl. And then she told me, you know this is your job now, right? It's your job now to bring the pie. And in order to do that, that meant I had to be the one to carry that squash forward into the future. It's my job now to steward that seed. This was the moment when I think I really became a seed keeper. When I realized that my connection to the seeds was more than theoretical, it was more than something I could read about in someone else's book. It was personal, it was a calling, and it was a responsibility. My responsibility to carry these seeds into the future. My grandma, Patty, never wrote down her recipes. Those of us who remember her recipes have to do our part to write them down, and the ones that we don't remember, we don't have. They're lost to us. It's our responsibility to carry these stories forward and these seeds forward, just as it's my responsibility to carry forward this seed of this squash. Every one of us probably has something that it's our job to hold on to. Because no one's going to carry your story forward better than you can. No one can tell your story better. No one can save the crops that are important to you the way you can. So that's the moment I became a seed keeper. If I have time, I can share another, but I can pass it down. Yeah, okay, I'll pass it.
Hi, I'm Leeza. I work with the Utopian Seed Project. We're based outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and we focus a lot on, I think, making that like first contact often with people that like maybe they're an existing farmer and they don't have that experience with saving seed, or they're someone that isn't necessarily like always coming to us with some seed that they stewarded for a long time, but they feel called to the work and they want to engage, and they often find us. I also helped to found the Appalachian Seed Growers Collective, which has been a project that's really important to me because I feel like a lot of my work is not necessarily grounded in like a single variety, but it's about like the idea that seeds like must be stewarded in community. And so through that project, we're able to work with many other farmers, and that's just like so hugely important to me, that if just me being a seed farmer doesn't like feel like enough, but like I have to be like in a network of seed farmers. Like a little bit about who I am and where I come from. This is a kind of one of the great questions of my life, actually. So my mom immigrated from Taiwan to America when she was in middle school, but she's actually half Russian, half Chinese. So my great-grandma, who helped raise me, she lived in 4 countries in her life and was like repeatedly displaced by war and looking for safety. She went from Siberia into northern China, where my grandma was born, and they like essentially walked on foot through China over the course of like 20 years and ended up in Taiwan and lived there, and that's where my mom was born, and then they eventually found their way to America. And I have always felt like, from the outside, people have felt like I have a very deep connection to where I'm from. Like the stories are very alive of how we got here, and you know, my great-grandma couldn't speak English, so we spoke a lot of Mandarin in the home, but from the inside, it doesn't feel that secure or something. Like my mom, when she was growing up in Taiwan, got bullied all the time for being too white, and then came to America and got bullied all the time for being too Asian. So it was just like, I feel like this kind of question of like identity and how do I like describe my identity to other people can be like deeply confusing to me and very confusing to everyone else that I'm talking to. Like my grandma, who's full-blooded Russian and born in Xinjiang, China, is really the one that has like taught me a lot about like Chinese food and how to cook it and what's important in it. And she's also the one that shared like a very precious seed story with me about this tenhua flower. And so my great-grandma had really bad asthma, and when she was in Taiwan, she starts kind of talking to some local people, and they know she has this really bad asthma, and they recommend that she looks for cao yao, which is like grass medicine, I guess is kind of a translation. But essentially they say like there's this doctor and he lives like up on this mountain, and you need to go walk up there, and you need to wait till he'll see you, and then he'll kind of give you some herbal medicine. And so she finally sees him, and he says, okay, you need to take this tenhua flower and dry it and mix it with rock sugar and drink it as a tea, and this is going to help you with your asthma. And he not only gave her the flowers, but he also gave her the seeds. So then she takes that down to where she's living, and she starts growing it, and she's like renowned in her like little area for having this like garden that's overflowing with this night blooming cactus, and people would like try to like sneak over the wall and like steal some of the flowers. They don't like bloom that often, and she'd be like, whoa, like I kind of need those, but like I'll happily give you the seeds if you could just like wait a minute, and then you can grow it yourself. And like this story has just like really influenced me, and the idea of like how much like power there is in the seed, right? And how different that feels than like the medical system that we exist in now, where like you are so rarely like given the ability to like take control of it for yourself and pass it on to other people. So that one is really important to me. Where else was I going with this? Also, the first seed crop I ever grew was a baby corn, and I was kind of obsessed with it because I have not had the experience very often that there's one other time in my life I have met someone that is a quarter Chinese, and I was like about to cry when I met them. Like it's just like I didn't even realize like how rare of like an experience, or like how much I had maybe wanted that. But I felt so at home growing the baby corn, because like here's this thing that like feels deeply American, and like the sense of like a barbecue, but also in the sense of like indigenous American, and like but that has found its way like all the way to China, and that just changed so much, and like become a part of that foodway, and then is like now come back to me here. And I feel like my family, they moved a lot for safety, right? Like, and they kept saying that like, oh, we invested so much, generationally we invested so much because we wanted you to come to America and we wanted you to have a better life. And I feel like I was very much like brought up with this like American dream type belief. And one day I was talking to my grandma, and I was asking her, like, you always have said this, that you want us to have a better life. Like, what does that actually mean to you? Like, materially, what does a better life actually look like? And she thought about it for a second, and she said, like, oh, it just means you don't have to move to be safe. Like, you can just be where you are. And that just is like this great privilege of my life to have been born in North Carolina and feel like I can live there and I can like be on land in there, and also to just try to understand. I think like seeds can move with you, right? Like even if you were displaced or whatever happens, just trying to engage with the great privilege of being able to be in place, and then also reckon with the idea that that is more tenuous than like we all would want to believe. So so much of my seed work is deeply culturally informed, but also like informed by the idea that I am like a total mutt, and we have been for like 3 generations. And what do you even do with that?
Wow, thank you. My name is Nate Kleinman. I'm a co-founder and co-director of Experimental Farm Network, also a founding member of Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance, and I work with the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library, the Iraqi Seed Collective, and the Jewish Seed Project, and some other culturally informed seed projects. If you were in the panel we did on seed liberation yesterday, you heard me talk a lot about the experience of working with indigenous seeds, and in many ways that's how I got into seed work. as a way to learn more and feel more connected to the people on whose land I was born and raised. I'm not gonna tell that story again, but suffice it to say, a lot of the seed work I did in the first really decade of my seed work was focused on other people's seeds, and it wasn't until a few years ago, actually, really pushed there by Owen Taylor of True Love Seeds, who we'd been growing for since it started, but part of True Love's mission is getting people to grow their ancestral seeds. And I was, they were putting some other seeds of ours in the catalog that were interested to other communities that True Love serves. But Owen sort of asked me a couple times, so what about your seeds? And I do a lot of collecting seeds out of the government, U.S. government collections, and that was a big topic of conversation yesterday. So I had put the names of the towns where I grew up in and places that were important to me, but I had never typed in a search for the communities in Europe where I knew my family had come from. I'm pretty much entirely Jewish, Eastern European Jewish. One great-grandmother was Christian. We did the ancestry test, and it confirmed, the blood test confirmed everything we had heard. It was like, you are 7/8 Jewish, basically Eastern European Jewish. My father is the 100% Jewish side, and he was also interested after I did the blood test, and somehow Ancestry told me that my father was 100%, but there's some rounding errors there. When he took the test, it told him he was 99% Eastern European Jewish and 1% Scottish. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, so I typed in Odessa, Ukraine, which is where my mother's mother was probably conceived. She was born in Buffalo, but her parents had lived in Odessa. My great-grandmother was a dressmaker. My great-grandfather was a tailor. We have this charming story about how my great-grandmother was walking down the street in Odessa, and she admired the buttonholes in an example of tailoring in a shop window, and she had to go in to pay her compliments to the person who had sewed those buttonholes, and turned out it was my great-grandfather. It occurred to me later in life that possibly she just went in there looking for a new worker, and it happened that she found herself a husband. So that was pretty much all I knew about that family. I also knew that they left in 1905, that someone in the dress shop had disappeared. This was a time of great upheaval in the Soviet Union, in the pre-Soviet Russia. The first Russian Revolution that failed was in 1905. A lot of Jews were involved in the leadership of the labor movements that really drove that, and so there was a major backlash against Jews, and that was a time of great violence against Jews across Europe. So I also knew that my family, my mother's father's parents, came from Belarus around the same time in 1905, fleeing the same violence in a different part of Europe. So when I found a few seeds that were collected in the 80s by a woman who actually lives in Eugene, who I haven't spoken to yet. She collected a few seeds in the farmer's market in Odessa and brought them back and donated them to the USDA, and they kept them and maintained them. So a few years ago, for the first time, I planted seeds from my own, at least from a community where I know I have ancestors from. One was a calendula, a really beautiful landrace calendula. Every plant is a little different than the one next to it. A nigella, or black seed, which is something, it's a crop I associate with the Middle East. I didn't even know that people grew it in Odessa, but there it was. And also a melon, like a kind of yellow cantaloupe sort of melon. And when I was growing them, every day I went out to the farm and I would see these plants growing, and I really felt the presence of my ancestors in a way I hadn't before. Every time I looked at them, I was thinking about where I came from and thinking about the, all the stories of dislocation and diaspora that make up the Jewish experience, at least for so many American Jews. It inspired me to do some more digging in my family history. I went in my email and I knew I'd compiled some stuff before, so I went in there looking for some information. I'm kind of the family historian, so anytime I would find family history info, I would send an email to my whole family about it, and that's how my record keeping system as well. I found a draft email that was like 2-3 pages long, equivalent of 2-3 pages, that I had started writing 3 years earlier to a third cousin who I've never met. And I had been connected to him by a second cousin who I didn't know. She also didn't know this third cousin. They got connected because of the ancestry blood tests. But we're easily able to trace how we were related. And he and his wife had done an extensive research. So I found this message from them that I had started replying to give him the story of my branch of the family, but I am rather long-winded and I write long things, so I hadn't finished it. And it was just still sitting there in my draft folder. So I quickly finished that email, finished the story, and sent it off to Mark Klebanoff, my third cousin. And like 3 hours later, he sent me a even longer reply with more information that he had learned in the intervening years, and all of this stuff that really just blew my mind. And we started a correspondence, and over the course of that summer, while I was still going out there every day and looking at this calendula, and the Nigella was kind of a crop failure that first year, but I figured out how to grow it the second year. But really the calendula was the one that I was interacting with every day. I would go back and do a little bit more digging, and by the time fall rolled around, I had learned things that I had not known, and that probably nobody in my family had known, that were really really meaningful and powerful for us. My mother always told the story. She grew up with her grandmother in the house, the ones from Belarus. And she said she would tell this story, for some reason both of the stories that she always told about her grandmother involved her Russian accent. And one was when she finally took her citizenship test over 50 years after she came to the US in the 1960s. They asked her, do you know can you say who the president is? And she said, of course, it's Kennedy. And then he said, well, who was president before? And she said, I arrived in 1905 when was Calvin Coolidge, or I don't remember who. And then she just listed all the presidents in a row in her thick Russian accent. And my mother also told a story of her recounting her siblings back in the old country. She was one of 10 or 12 or 9, or she never had the full, when she tried to list all of her siblings, she didn't always have the same list. It wasn't always the same names. And it was this funny joke. But, and that's always how my mom played it, we Jews, we like to play for laughs. But then this cousin of mine had the full list. He had all of her siblings' names. And not only that, he was able to tell me that 6 of them came to the United States. And we only knew of one of them, the one sister who was close with my great-grandmother. And they both went to Buffalo together. So I had all these new names. He's told us that one of them went to Azerbaijan in the teens, and he ended up dying as an old man in the Gulag in the 70s. And 3 of them stayed in Europe. One of them survived World War II and died in the 1950s, and 2 of them were murdered by the Nazis in Belarus in 1942. And I had assumed that I had some distant relatives who had died in the Holocaust, but I didn't know that it had never imagined that like the sisters of the grandmother that my mother grew up with, who I heard all these stories about, had been murdered. And that I was able to learn their names was really powerful. And then a few weeks after that, this cousin who had been inspired to do more digging by our communications went looking and got in touch with some of the descendants of that one brother who went to Azerbaijan. And that, my third cousin over there had photographs of these 2 women and their whole families. So suddenly because I was growing this calendula, I was able to not only learn the names, but look in the eyes see the faces of my ancestors who were killed in a massacre in the woods outside Bober, Belarus. And so this experience obviously crystallized for me the power of seeds and the potential of working with seeds, and how meaningful these things can be, these living beings that are part of all of our stories, even when we don't know it. And so I think it certainly changed the way I approach working with other people's seeds as well. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Can I tell a story? Okay, I'll tell a quick story. Also because Owen Taylor of True Love Seeds was supposed to be on this panel, but he couldn't make it. So I'm actually gonna tell an ancestral seed story that begins and ends with Owen Taylor, as so many things do. So what my weird seed claim to fame is that I just happened to be volunteering on the farm in 2017 when Owen started True Love Seeds. I remember when he was trying to pick the name, and True Love wasn't even the name that I supported. But that happened because April of 2017, I happened to move to Philly for a job, and I'm living with my aunt out in the suburbs, and I don't have any friends. But there is this guy on Instagram who was saving seeds and saving about seed stories and all the politics behind seeds, and I was like, this is pretty cool. And I slid into his DMs, and I was like, hey, do you need a volunteer? And he was like, I always need a volunteer. So I just would spend part of my weekend every week on the farm with Owen, and he would do this thing where he kept just asking me about we're pounding fence posts into the ground in the rain, and he's asking me about what seed tells my story, and I'm like, what are you talking about? He's asking about my family and kind of where I came from and all these food cultures and these seed stories, and I'm like, I don't know, dude, But then I got to thinking, and I brought that question to my mom, and then she just starts opening up about the story of these stories of so I'm from Broward County, from South Florida, from Broward County, and she just opens up about these stories of growing up in this mid 20th century Black community in Broward, and how everybody had gardens, and because it was South Florida, everybody had citrus and fruit trees. And she was like, we just walked through the neighborhood picking beans and eating beans and sitting in the tree and eating oranges. And she was started telling me the stories that I'd never heard before, right? And she was just she kept asking me about all these things that she remembered from her childhood that are no longer available, that she's never seen in the grocery store, right? But that were so common just in the neighborhood. And that sort of over time, that sort of like crystallized and these like resonances with like my own seed memories, which are also with like my mother and her mother and my grandmother's kitchen, right? Which was always like super hot because it was South Florida, and my grandparents only had a window unit AC in the den, which was never on. And I would sit there cracking pecans at the table while they talked. And there were collards on the stove that my grandmother would be cooking all afternoon, and those collards were grown in the backyard by my grandfather, who also stewarded what you would now call a food forest. But, you know, that term would not have been used for them. But you know, there was a banana tree and some sugar apples and like this massive mango tree, right? And we go to the backyard and pick mangoes. And I kept that, that became a story that I would always tell, right? In the discourse about seed stories. It's a story that always kind of grounded me. And I wear many hats, but one of those hats is with the Collard Project. I do a lot of work with collards and also about collards, right, as like this really powerful story of agro-biodiversity across the Black South, about like making place, right, through like the sort of like forest mobilities and like various kinds of mobilities of like migrations and diaspora with people and seeds, right, around like people like adapting to these landscapes across the South and really making the South in a culinary way and in an ecological kind of way. Anyways, I just happened to be, a couple weeks ago, I was on the phone with my grandmother, and I just happened to ask her about those collards in the backyard. And she basically said that collard patch died with your grandfather a decade ago. She was like, I just cooked the collards. I never grew them. He grew everything. And because like whenever we talk, and she asks me, oh, like what are you doing on your little farm stuff? And for the past year, it's just always been collards. And then she'll be like, oh yeah, I really need to figure out how to find some good collards, because like the grocery store collards are just like not the same as the ones that her husband grew in the backyard. And that had not fully clicked in my head that that was his role, was like that he was the one doing that work. And also maybe, I think this was like this past weekend or last weekend, Owen was in Durham and we were hanging out, and I told him that story, and he was like, if you can find those collard seeds, like in a freezer in the shed or something, and they might still germinate. And I was like, oh, I've literally never even thought about my grandfather as a seed keeper. Like, I've never even thought about that. Like, I've never fully realized that, like, that's the lineage that I am in. Like, the first seeds that I saved were mustard seeds that I grew on my aunt's back porch outside of Philly. And I literally, it was sort of like, because I was volunteering at True Love, and I was like, oh, let me like do my own little seed work. And I literally took every single pod, one by hand, and like just to kind of like put the seeds in this little jar. And I was like, just in the past like week, I was like, oh, like shit, like I like there's a lineage there, right? Like there's literally a lineage there through seeds and through stories. That sort of like connects me back to my grandfather in a way that I had never even realized. Anyway, so that was the story. Begins and ends with Owen. But
Ask your grandma to look for the seeds yet?
I would need to do it myself. I can't. It's the trio of like my grandmother and my parents trying to find some seeds in like some random like shed or chest freezer. I am excited to go try to like search, but also it's gonna be a mess. But okay, so something that I do want to think through, because like some themes that I kind of saw across the board were something Leeza mentioned around like what it means to be in place, right? To do this work in place, and also what a privilege it is to be able to like have the stability to do this work in place, right? And I'm thinking about that, which I think all of you kind of brought up in different ways, of both like being in place, but also of migration, right, or of co-migration, right, with people and seeds. And I'm wondering if anybody kind of wants to comment on, in your own work, of like what seed work looks like in place, and also how you sort of like think about doing seed work in place with seeds that are also like directly connected to these other places around the world.
All right, so this is like a seed failure that I had. Okay, Nate will not remember this, but one time, a couple years ago, you gave me some seeds that you pulled from Grin that were, like, Nate often has like a bag of seeds, and it's just like, yeah, you got it? Okay. And so I'm like looking through them, and they're all irrelevant to me until I find this one melon, and it's from Xinjiang, China. And I'm like, what? Like, this is crazy. This is where my grandma is from. And I wound up talking to her about it, and it's actually like it's very like a deep pain point for my grandma, that the way that they had to leave there. They actually wound up like leaving her grandma because they like had to like flee on foot. Basically, they had to like leave her grandma behind. She couldn't make the journey, and so it's like a very emotional like spot to just think about, like not only leaving the land, but like literally leaving her like most beloved family member behind. So we start having this conversation, and she's like, "Oh, it's a melon. Like, you know, your babu, my babushka is, you know, my great grandma, but like always is talking about how much she like loves this, like could never forget like how fragrant and amazing these melons were from Xinjiang." So I'm like thinking, this is gonna be beautiful. I'm gonna grow this melon. My grandma's gonna eat it. We're gonna all cry. It's gonna be this amazing thing. So I grow it on the Utopian Seed Project farm, and our ethos there is like very tough love, and we're really into the idea of like just treating our plants like shit, basically. And that's our breeding strategy. And like sometimes I wonder if we're just bad farmers, but other times I have to remind myself that we're, I guess, doing it on purpose. And they all died. And it, like kind of came back to this thing where Benita used to encourage me to grow something from Siberia. And I was just like, I don't know if that makes any sense to me, because I don't live in Siberia. I don't even live close to something that looks like Siberia. And I just like, I don't know if I should even be doing that, right? Because like my work is about climate adaptation. It's about like really tough and super resilient plants, and like where can I find like the balance of like wanting to have that cultural connection and then also like being appropriate to the place that I'm in. And so we're in Appalachia, and there is like an incredible legacy of seed work that has been done in the South, and like specifically even just like valley to valley where I live. And like it feels so important to me to like incorporate that into my seed work. Like I'm not just going to act like all of my cultural lineage has happened before me, and it is only up to me now to like keep it going. But like I'm super like ride or die for North Carolina. That's where I live and that's where I'm from. And like just I'm always on this like tension between wanting to honor like who I am and where I come from, and like wanting to connect to my family, and also like being like realistic but also like respectful to where I currently am. And I feel like through like a really amazing seed mentor that I've had, like I've started growing out like her favorite collard, and like we in our collective, like one of our members is growing out this greasy bean that they got from a neighbor that has been in this valley for generations, and that's like really a part of the Appalachian foodway. And so I just like I always want it to be both. I don't ever want to go just one direction into cultural or just one direction into like this super regional. Like I feel like it's so important to me to like just like ride that like balance between like where I come from and where I am now.
Thank you. I believe that melon was called Hami Gua, and and I grew that successfully once, so I have some extra seeds I can get to you. It grew in South Jersey, so it'll grow. It should grow in Appalachia. But I think in my bag I do have a Siberian seed that you should try. some honeyberries. I don't know. It might be late to get them to germinate, but we'll play around with that. Another thing from this family history research that I learned about was my first actual verified farmer ancestor. Jews in Eastern Europe were largely not allowed to own agricultural land. We were forced to live in shtetls, in small, typically almost all Jewish towns that were like next to a Gentile town. That was sort of or like on the edge of a town. And so I did know, one thing I know from my father's side, that my grandmother's parents were pretty prosperous in Romania. They owned a few bakeries and a flour mill. And it has only occurred to me in starting to do seed work that they weren't allowed to actually grow the grains that they worked with every day. But they lived in a rural place, in this rural village, and I've thought a lot about what that must have been like for my ancestors, and no doubt that played a role in their decision to leave everything they knew and had known for generations to come to America. And I knew that one thing I know about my grandmother's father is that he always made wine in Brooklyn in the basement, and he made like sacramental Passover wine that he would then distribute to other Jews in the neighborhood and other people in the family. And I also have been told that he never really got comfortable living in this country. He was the last of his siblings. His parents had already come here 15 years earlier, and he was the last holdout, and World War I was sort of the last straw. When World War I was over, his siblings sent a couple of emissaries to Romania and said, "You're coming back. You have to come to America now. It's time." And so he did. But I imagine that process of making wine in the basement was something that connected him to this rural existence that he had left behind. But I did learn that from this third cousin that my great grandfather, whose name I hadn't even known before this, his name was Berko Klebanov, filed a claim for losses in a fire with, I guess, some insurance company or something in the 1870s in Belarus, and he lost agricultural implements and a shed. So that's my one bit of proof that I have had farmer ancestors, or at least someone who was an agriculturalist. But learning about that also got me thinking a lot about my own experience on this land that is not mine. But I've been thinking more and more in the last year and a half since the genocide has been happening in Gaza, and things have been spiraling. Violence has been spiraling out of control in the West Bank. I've been learning about this strain of anti-Zionist Jewish thought that really began in Europe, where people, even before the creation of the State of Israel, there were many Jews who thought that it was a bad idea, that going to somebody else's land and colonizing it, even if it could be defined as some kind of recolonization, was not smart and not good, and a lot of people were opposed to it even then. And there's this Yiddish term. The word is Doigkeit, which means here-ness. And we have these notions of the promised land, and that's what the land of Israel held in the Jewish imagination for thousands of years, that one day we're going to get back to the promised land. And this idea of Doikite, of here-ness, is about finding your own promised land wherever you are, and that's what our ancestors did for thousands of years. That's why these rituals and the culture remain so important and so strong. And so I've tried to apply that to my life more, and to really feel the Doikite of South Jersey and Philadelphia, where I live and where I'm from, and hopefully I'll be able to bring that with me wherever else I move in this world.
I love that. Find the promised land wherever you are. I think that's been part of my story as well, and the story of many of my seeds that I carry. Seeds and people both need a home in the land and adapt to the land. It's interesting to me that you brought this question up, and because I've really spent so much of my life feeling so displaced. And not merely because I am descendant of people who were taken from their homeland and brought to land whose original people in many cases have been displaced from their own homeland as well. But also because my family, both of my grandparents, made the decision to leave their families in the South and migrate north. And they had many good reasons for doing so, right? My mother's mother left southern Georgia to go to Detroit and was part of that second wave of Great Migration to join the auto industry. And my other grandmother left North Carolina and went into New Jersey. And they both, in doing so, left behind not only their families, but also a life close to the land. They put that behind them. When I talked to my grandma Carolyn, the one who went to Michigan, she tells me about how she grew up. She didn't want to grow up farming like her parents. She grew up on a farm, and she would help them, pick cotton when she was young. And there were things that she really loved about that. She loved going into the woods and finding wild berries to bring home. But she really, really hated the feeling of being trapped in the traumatic legacy of the land that they were on in the sharecropping situation, right? So she told me, when she left, she went to university, and she said, I put that life behind me, and I thought to myself, I am never coming back to the South. I will never return. And so she left that and left behind her connection to the land there. And I grew up in Massachusetts, away from almost all of my extended family, and really felt displaced there, really did not feel a connection to the land that I grew up on, to the community that I lived among. And a big part of the reason that I became a farmer, and a big part of the reason that I decided to devote my work to seed work has been about reconnection to the land and to myself and my community through seed work. The seeds that I love the most, that are the most special to me, are the ones that share that story, the ones that have traveled and migrated, and had to find a new home somewhere. I think about seeds that come from the motherland, like cowpeas and rice and okra, and of the stories of the women who attempted to bring seeds with them when they knew that they would be sold into slavery. And there's these stories throughout the diaspora women braiding seeds into their hair, into the hair of their children, and carrying these seeds across the ocean, or carrying these seeds as they were sold plantation to plantation. Not every seed was able to thrive in the new soil. Right today, I steward seeds from West Africa, as well as African American seeds, and some of the seeds that the West African crops that I steward are new to me, because they never really found a home in the gardens of the enslaved Africans that may have attempted to bring them with them. And so I grow them to reconnect with that longer ancestral history. But the seeds that are closest to me are those that were able to be stewarded by my ancestors, that were able to go with them as they were forcibly relocated again and again. And I also think of crops like collards and the squash, which, collards which come originally from Europe, and the squash which originally is from the Taino people of the Caribbean, both of which are not originally African crops, but were adopted by my ancestors and adopted by them because they were able to find connection to these crops. So those are the stories that make me feel connected again. And even though I still feel displaced in the land that I currently live, I do feel a sense of place with the seeds that I grow and with the soil in which I grow those seeds.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have until 2:45. Until 3. Oh, okay. I'm less worried now. I do want hold space really quickly if anyone in the audience has any questions or reflections, comments. Ancestral stories. Oh, on Zoom. Yeah.
We had a question from the online, from Elena online, who was wondering, if you don't have a foothold into your own seed stories, how would you recommend connecting with your own seed stories, and also doing that in a way that doesn't feel like appropriation or colonization?
That's the question.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think, for one thing, for people who don't feel like they don't have a seed story, don't have this connection, I think the best place to do is to start by asking your elders, anyone older than you who is still alive, and ask them what was being cooked in the kitchen when they were growing up. What did they have in the backyard? What kind of plants did they grow, if they grew anything? What were their parents' favorite foods? What did they cook at the holidays? That's the beginning of interrogating to find your own history, and you'll be really surprised at the things that come out. One thing that Bonita Adib likes to ask in groups is to say, okay, you are, this planet becomes uninhabitable, but we've found this new planet that's a lot like Earth, and you can bring 10 seeds with you. What are those seeds that are most important to you for your culture, for yourself, for your family? What do you bring with you? And many workshops, she will make people get out a piece of paper and sit there and write those 10 crops. So feel free to do that if you're interested. And so I think if for people who are, don't have that ancestral connection, and I know there are people who don't have elders that they can ask, and there are people who were adopted and don't have that connection to their biological lineage. These questions are a lot harder, but I think I think if you have a relationship with the plant yourself, that's your own relationship, and it's never going to be the same as someone who has a different kind of cultural relationship there. But I would urge someone who's on this journey to, if you're just growing something in your garden, personally, I don't think you have to really worry about, are you appropriating someone else's culture? Seeds travel, and seeds bridge cultures, seeds connect cultures. And so, if something is important to you, get to know it better. And yeah, I'll leave that there.
Just a continuation of what you're saying. Everyone's seed story, no matter if it started with their grandma or if it started with their several greats removed grandparent, it started with someone. Someone started the seed story, and that person could be you. I do a lot of ancestral work with my seeds, but I also have to keep in mind that someday I will be an ancestor. And the seeds that I carry, I'm carrying into the future. The important thing here is to have a real relationship with the seeds that we carry, that we're viewing them not as novelties, not as some exotic piece of someone else's culture, but if this is something important to you, if it's one of your favorite things to cook and eat, do you have a recipe that you've created? Maybe you're the beginning of a seed story. That's not to say that you should ignore the story that came before. You absolutely should know that story and should tell that story, but you can also become the beginning of that seed's continuation into your future. If you tell that story well and you carry it forward, that is also important work to remember. I do think it is important to ask the question of, when does it become appropriation? I do think it is important to question if you feel that you don't have an honest relationship with that seed. In particular, if you have a harmful relationship with the people from whom that seed originally belongs, I think that's important to interrogate in yourself. But I also think that you can fall in love with something and have a loving relationship and tell the story faithfully to the best of your ability and become the ancestor that you wish you had.
Yes. Also, asking what context you're in. Are you the most appropriative relationship I can think of is Monsanto patenting an indigenous corn. This is going to have huge economic consequences, cultural consequences. Are you selling the seed? Are you growing the seed? And where did you get the seed from? Since being in Appalachia, people have given me seeds, right? And we're thinking about bringing this pepper into our collective that was stewarded by this family for they can trace it back over 100 years. And there is gratitude there, right? Because some of those elders are actually so scared that this pepper is gonna die out with them. And it's not always people can gift you a seed, right? It can happen in a very loving and beautiful way. And again, coming back to the idea that seeds are very much intended to be stewarded in community. And so you could look at the food that you're already growing, that's part of your foodway, but you could just, who's growing around you, right? Do you know, is there a community garden? Do you have neighbors? Is there a lineage that exists to your place that you can tap into? You might actually come across some elders that are have been waiting for you, right? That really want to pass the seed down to you. So I just it is possible for seeds to be gifted in a very generous and beautiful way, and make sure that you're looking for that.
Oh, you go ahead.
I do just want to make a note. I do think what we're talking about right now is, passing seeds down in your own lineage. It's not the same thing as selling and commercialization of the seed, and I do think that is a different thing. If you're considering being someone who is selling seeds, that is a whole other conversation in relation to your seed work. Your personal relationship with the seed is not all that should be considered. I did want to add that, because I think you touched on that. This is different when you are attempting to commercialize a seed. There are additional questions that you should ask about if you are the right person to do that. Yeah.
I say we have a question, but I was going to really quickly, I just want to comment on this conversation, is that I think something I think about a lot is how the thing about cultural seed work is there's so much, I think, political possibility there for an actual reparative politic, right, of actual solidarity. When it comes to utilizing your own labor and resources and land, right, to do the work of stewarding seeds in community with people who sort of belong to different cultural or diasporic groups as you. I think of also what Vivian mentioned yesterday, right, around the Palestinian Malakia being grown out by True Love Seeds, which is actually I was introduced to that plant at True Love Seeds, right, and they've been stewarding it for 9 years. And they've been stewarding it not just by themselves, but in community with people of the Palestinian diaspora in the region, right? That matters, right? That's a way to build a relationship with a seed in a way that is deeply in community and is deeply part of a more reparative politic, right? And that also involves you kind of really deepening your own relations, both with that plant as well as with that community. But we have a question.
Well, it's in the same topic. I was hoping to hear about, as people who, you're all part of a formal organization that does seed work. So do you have a formal method of creating an agreement around the use of your own seeds? Do you have a method or a formal statement that you use in the terms of, are your seeds all available for the people who use them to use them and take them in different directions? If you have formalized that process, how have you formalized it? Do you have is that enough of a question to get the question started? Yeah.
I want to look something up first, so somebody else is going to have to go first.
Okay, so I think that Utopian Seed Project has been around for 5 years now? So we're I think in the beginning, it was just we're just starting to talk about seeds. We don't know that many people that are talking about seeds. What does it mean? And now the conversation has developed to the point where it's become really serious, that we need to be honest and intentional about which seeds we're growing and where did they come from. And a big part of that conversation is also whose right is it to freely give a seed? So if I breed something, it's just my own ethic, and I don't believe that everyone should feel the same way as I do, that I'm just share it, spread it, do whatever you want with it. I don't care. I want to see it go everywhere. But that would have come from at least 2 parents, right? And so then is it my place now to say, do what you want, right? Because I'm just coming into this story at this specific point, and it's been going on for a long time before me, and that's a big question. I don't know that we really have the answer to, right? At what point can you say to somebody else that this is, I believe it's fine for you to use this, and when are you speaking for other people? I don't know. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I I run a very small seed company where I grow everything that I sell. But when I'm thinking about what I offer as something that I'm selling to the public, it is something that I have to think very carefully about. What do I make accessible? What do I sell? What do I not? And not everything that I grow is something that I make available to people to purchase, right? The idea of selling seeds, the act of selling seeds, that's very complicated, because when I grow the seeds, my relationship with them is deeper than anything that can be consumed and commercialized. And yet that is how I'm able to sustain the work that I do and to keep existing on the land. But it's not something to take lightly at all, the selling of a seed. And for that reason, there are seeds that I grow that I do not sell, especially if I don't think that I'm the right person to be able to offer the seed. If the source of the seed is questionable to me, where I think that maybe they were not the way that the seeds entered my hands was maybe not a good faith transaction, where maybe these are someone's seeds that maybe they shouldn't have maybe they were not the right person who gave me the seeds, right? So there are some seeds I just don't feel comfortable, especially if they're not already out there in the world. If I find a seed that I know isn't available publicly already, the act of putting it out there in the world becomes a lot more complicated. I do have seeds that I save that I've been told specifically by the people who gave them to me, please don't sell them. And so they won't be sold by me. I won't be the person to put them out in the world and violate that trust. And so the only way that those seeds get distributed is through a relationship of trust and a gift, saying, I received these seeds from someone who asked that they never be sold. I will give them to you if you can promise me that you will only ever give them to someone who also understands this. So, but the seeds that I have available for sale, they're going out into the world, and I don't have any control about what people are doing with them. I'm just hoping that they're going out to people who have good faith intentions. But for the seeds where I can't trust those intentions, and I know that selling them would be a violation of the trust of the gift in which that I received, I simply do not make them available.
Thanks. So one of the, you may have heard about the open source seed initiative, which there was involved with one of the talks yesterday, and I'm going to read the pledge that goes along with open source seed initiative seeds. Basically, this open source seed initiative started with the idea of creating some kind of license that would prevent future patenting or other restrictions on seeds. And they went back and forth, as I understand it, and thought about different ways of doing that, and ultimately settled on this pledge hasn't, as far as I know, has never been tested in court, whether this is a legally binding, like the equivalent of what we call an MTA, a materials transfer agreement. But it's nevertheless, there are quite a few of the seed companies that are represented here at this conference are advocates of and are when they release new seeds that they've done breeding work on, they put this pledge on it. But this pledge is really just for new things. It's not for, you're not supposed to pledge something that is old, that existed already. But it's very short. It says, you have the freedom to use these OSCE pledged seeds in any way you choose. In return, you pledge not to restrict others' use of these seeds or their derivatives by patents or other means, and to include this pledge with any transfer of these seeds or their derivatives. And so when we started selling actually a Lenape corn for the first time, that came to us from a Cherokee seed keeper who had a very small amount of the seeds. We discussed it with local Lenape people who we were in community with already to see how they felt about us doing this, and we made the decision to share the proceeds between a couple of those organizations, both in New Jersey, one in North and one in South. And ultimately, they said they do want to get these seeds out there, and but we decided when we did it that we would add a little note at the bottom of the description on the website that again is, not been tested in court, but we just wrote, note, by purchasing these special seeds, you agree to never attempt to patent or otherwise restrict the use of these seeds or their descendants. These seeds are sacred and they should be treated as such. And I know that there's it seems like, I don't know, oxymoronic or something to call seeds sacred in a space where you're selling them commercially. But again, these are seeds that were almost lost. And so the Lenape folks who I worked with on this said, we want to make sure these seeds are out there, and even if there's nobody who is working with them in our community, we want to make sure somebody is growing them, and that when somebody in our community wants them, they're still there. So again, we don't know if that's it's the legalities of seeds are really strange. Like there's these bag tags on seeds that say when you open this bag, that's the equivalent of signing a contract that says you'll do this. And so we wanted to sort of get something like that in there. And I've thought about whether we should put that kind of note on all of our seeds, but we have a lot and we haven't done that yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's an important distinction I like to make in my mind as someone that is actively growing and saving seeds is commodifying the seed itself and then paying for my labor and my expertise. And they both involve money, but it's a very different emotional space, I think, to exist in. Also just drawing attention to the difference between a crop and a variety, right? So we've talked about okra a little bit here. We all have our own relationship with okra. My mom used to cook it in Chinese stir fries all the time when I was a kid, and then I would go to my elementary school and we would have fried okra in the lunch line. And so these are very different cultures that both have a relationship to okra. So if somebody is asking me about the cultural appropriateness of relating to okra as a whole, then I would say, okay, well, we're in North Carolina, so you need to be really serious about working with chefs or whoever, the people that are cooking it around you. You have to honor their food way. But I could maybe be the one to give you some cultural context about specific Chinese varieties of okra, although I am also a little removed from that. There's layers to the respect, right? There's a larger crop and cultural context, and then there's this family has been stewarding this okra for this long, and it it means something to them on a hyper personal level. And just being very careful, I think, as an institution to not tokenize one person and give them the mic and the permission to say that something is or is not okay, and just being very careful to understand how nuanced and complicated it is from a crop level all the way down to a specific variety.
I mentioned that materials transfer agreement, and that's something that's very standard in the professional plant world, in the academic plant world, and I thought I'd read this one. like I get a lot of seeds from the U.S. government collection. That's called the National Plant Germplasm System, or NPGS. And all of the seeds that come from a few countries come with, like they all have a sort of standard materials transfer agreement with them. And so just because this is related to this conversation, I figured I'd read this one. So this is from the Republic of Georgia in the Caucasus Mountains. And it says, this germplasm was provided to the NPGS under a material transfer agreement, MTA, between the USDA/Agricultural Research Service and the Georgia National Academy of Science, with authorization from the Georgia Ministry of Environment. Per the terms of the MTA, it is freely available for research, training, and breeding purposes. No recipient can claim ownership over the germplasm or obtain intellectual property rights on it or related information. Recipients may reproduce the material and distribute it to other parties, provided they are also willing to accept the conditions of this agreement. The recipient's retention of the material constitutes such acceptance. So again, simply by receiving those seeds, you are essentially signing a legal contract, and that is kind of standard in the seed world. So we maybe should be thinking more about creative ways that we can do that with the various seeds we work with.
Quick time check. We have like 3 minutes. So I don't know if anyone has like a super quick thought. Oh, we have 2 announcements.
First thing is I just put this QR code on the screen, and I invite you all to pull out your phones and scan that code and leave some comments for the Organic Seed Alliance, because every comment is read and taken into consideration, and this helps to put on future conferences and other programming through the organization. And then this is probably a question that's going to be way too long for you all to answer in what is now probably 2 minutes, but for you to think about if anyone wants to shout out something. I guess, first of all, thank you for sharing your work. I understand that there is a lot of emotional labor that goes into this work that is unpaid and often unrecognized. And so I guess I'm wondering, is there any support that you wish you had, or any support that you do have from your customers, your fellow seed keepers, anything you want to shout out, like, please give us this, or thank you for that?
I was going to say, great question. I mean, there are many emotional supports I wish I had, but I need to take on that.
I have something. It is part of my mission to empower other Black seed stewards. I don't want to just be growing the things that I love to grow on my own. I want to help other people of color to grow and steward the seed crops that are important to them. So if that's you, or if that's someone you know and love, please send them my way, because I want to be a support. That is part of my mission. It is also part of my mission to help other Black growers or people that have a family seed or are looking for a particular family seed, to help them find it, to help them steward it, to learn how to save it on their own, to offer assistance in stewarding it in any way, in whatever way feels most comfortable to them. So if that's someone you know, or if that's you, please reach out, because I want to offer myself to the community in that way, and to support others who have stories like my squash story and seeds from their family that they long to protect or to reconnect to. So.
Yeah, I feel like we asked a lot of questions today that like I love thinking about and don't have the answers to, right? Like, I feel so grateful for like this space that is just like the marriage of so many different ideas and perspectives, and like feeling like none of us alone has to be like the arbitrator of what is right and wrong and ethical, and it's just like just hearing from everyone and like everyone feeling comfortable and like us like as a group really like trying so hard to create a space where everyone feels comfortable to bring their perspective to the table is such a relief to me because yeah, there's just so much to learn, right? And I think we'll be talking about this probably forever, and I hope we keep talking about it.
Yeah, thank you. The one thing that comes to mind for me is feedback. Like, our seed catalog this year has over 600 seeds in it, and I've written most of the descriptions in that catalog, and I know that I've fucked up. And I know I will again, and I want people to tell me. I don't want people to just get mad about it and tell other people and not tell me. So if we think we've done something wrong, let us know. Like we are open to and really encourage and appreciate feedback, whether it's positive or negative, even if it's like, I hate you, I'm never gonna buy seeds from you again, and this is why. I want to hear that. Thanks.
Yeah. I want to thank everyone for coming, and also I want to thank our amazing panelists for doing this thing. You can also, if you want to keep rolling with like me and Amirah and Nate, we are doing another session about seed education and ethics. Wow, imagine.
I can't be in that one. They scheduled me for another one.
Nate was double booked. Amirah and I will be in another session about seed ethics. Thank you for coming.